Here we go. We are recording. So thank you so much for joining us. And Raldeep, please, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Peta. My name is Rahuldeep Singh Gill. I am a Sikh and a scholar of the Sikh tradition, and I teach religions at California Lutheran University outside of Los Angeles, California. I am associate professor here in the religion department, and I also serve as the campus interfaith strategist.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. As you know, the theme of our summer school is memory and memory in the religious life. And I wondered if you could start by telling us how important memory is in the Sikh religion and the place that memory plays in the religion.
Absolutely. There's two daily ways that memory is important in the Sikh tradition. One is in the Sikh prayer known as the Ardas, which is a standing communal prayer that Sikhs do at various different events, but that's how a ceremony is begun and ended, is through the Ardas. And the text of the Ardas, the first part of it remembers the 10 gurus, and then the sacrifices of many of the Sikhs who gave the ultimate sacrifice in history. It remembers Sikh sacred spaces, and it asks for God's blessings on all of humanity. So memory is an essential part of that fundamental prayer. Another way that memory comes up is through a practice known as Simran. Simran, or the focus on Nam, which can be translated as name, or God's renown, God's greatness, God's wonder. Focusing on the wonder of God, remembering God in those ways, is part of how a Sikh should use their daily breath. And the Sikh scripture is an aid to remember God in that way, and other forms of Simran of remembering are also an aid. For some people, Simran means closed eyes and meditating. For my activist friends, Simran means handing hot meals to the hungry in Los Angeles. Those are both forms of remembering God.
Now, it's very interesting because you're using the term remembering or memory in what I can see as at least two distinct ways. One is remembering historical events, but that's not quite the same as the remembering God. The meaning of the word is different. I wondered whether you'd flesh out those two types of memory or the different types of memory there.
Yeah, I think they can be compared in terms of revelation. So there's a concept of Sikh revelation or inspiration. Revelation takes multiple forms. On the one hand, it's the communication between God and holy people on earth. For Sikhs, that shows up in the scripture. That's the inspired poetry from Guru Nanak and 5 of his successors, the founders of the Sikh faith, as well as Hindu and Muslim poet saints from various castes who find their poetry enshrined in the Guru Granth Sahib, or quote-unquote Sikh scripture of 1,430 pages. But revelation also happens in history. Interaction between the Sikh community and God's will happens in history. And revelation is always happening in our hearts or our minds. In the East, there's a heart-mind. We don't have that Cartesian problem.
Yes.
But God is speaking to us in our hearts. If we can get out of our own selfish ways, we can hear that revelation always happening. And so those are the different ways in which remembering actually is for the human mind. But in an interesting way, I wrote a paper in which I also talked about the possibility of God remembering us. And we are always in God's heart. And that is a constant thing. And I thought of thinking for a Sikh of feeling that presence of the divine at all times is really about shifting her or his human mind to realize the divine reality that is always remembering.
Very beautiful. That's lovely. Thank you. So if I can go back to the remembering past events, do you tell a story? Is there a narrative? And could you just share with us what that story is, what that narrative is?
Sure. The Sikh meta-narrative that scholars are told to be suspicious of and stuff like that, but the Sikh meta-narrative is of Guru Nanak coming into the world, sent on a divine mission, totally as a human being, to solve the problems of religious conflict in the world, and to remind people of God consciousness in the world, and to replace home, which is me, selfishness, with hukam, which comes from an Arabic word, probably related to something in Hebrew, for God's command, God's will.
Not wisdom.
God's wisdom. And so replacing that in our hearts is what Guru Nanak came to remind us of. The Sikh community had 9 successors to Guru Nanak's office, the 10 gurus, and their lives between 1469 and 1708 represent the growth of the community and that message spreading in the Punjab, in India, and other parts of the world. In the middle of that, 200-year or so period, a certain kind of politicization happens that to some eyes might seem odd, because we have this differentiation between the political and the religious, or the secular and the non-secular, or religious. But in Sikh thought, the narrative there is always of engaging with the divine will in the heart and in the world. And so Sikhism takes on the Sikh community takes on military responsibility in its understanding to defend itself from seats of power that are trying to infringe upon that narrative growing in history.
That's very interesting. So you have a memory, and perhaps we would even describe this as a problematic memory, a memory of conflict, of discomfort, and you have other memories as well of conflict and discomfort. Is that correct?
Yes, there's a lot of memorialization of martyrdom and being ready to give the ultimate sacrifice. 2 of the 10 gurus were martyred, and the 10th guru, died of wounds from an attempted assassination. So, and his entire family was obliterated in a revolt against the powers that be in the Punjab at the time, a political and military revolt. So remembering martyrs, remembering people who have given the ultimate sacrifice is important for Sikhs, but also aligning oneself with those who are in discomfort right now is really important. Guru Nanak, the founder of Sikhism, has a beautiful hymn in which he concludes that I am the lowest, the very lowest of the low. What need have I for the high? There where the lowest are cared for, God's grace shines down indeed.
Beautiful. Could you tell me, how do you remember? How do you keep this narrative alive? Is it recited daily? Is there a cycle of readings? How do you keep this narrative going? And then I want to come back to the problematic, but before we move on to them, just how do you tell your story?
The most important thing that Sikhs do on a daily basis is to pray and reciting the hymns of the gurus. The most important one is Japji, which is a hymn of about 40 stanzas, and that's sung in the morning. There's also an evening hymn and a bedtime hymn. In addition to that, throughout the day, Sikhs are asked to remember God in their heart in whatever form that works for them. Again, I said some people meditate, some people serve. And finally, the ardas, that collective prayer, is the very regular communal aspect of remembering together that Sikhs do.
So children or people brought up in the Sikh religion would know the narrative well because of these daily recitals, or do they need to be told individually as well?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm involved in a Sikh summer camp in upstate New York that emerges, and the Sikh summer camp movement in the diaspora emerges out of an anxiety about people forgetting, right? And so Sikhs are constantly throughout the world trying to find new and better ways to keep people close to the faith. We're a minority religion, only 25 million around the world, most of whom are in Punjab. And so that is definitely the idea that from childhood all the way to your last breath, you're learning about that. The first thing that you're supposed to whisper in a child's ear is God's name, one of many of God's names, and then you bring the newborn baby, whenever the mother and the baby are healthy enough, to the Gurudwara to bow in front of the Guru, which is the book today, the 1430-page book, and begin the spiritual journey in that way. When Sikhs are married, they walk around the Guru Granth Sahib. The couple walks around the Guru Granth Sahib to symbolize that their life is going to be inspired by this. And
sorry, could I just clarify for everybody who's listening? You're walking around a book?
Book. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep, that's the center of your life. Right. And at your final, during cremation, the ardas is again performed, and God is beseeched to take care of the departed soul.
I want to go back to those difficult memories, the ones that we talked about.
Can I just interrupt with one question here? I know that for Hindus, remembering God at the time of death is very central. What you described seems to be related to that, but you did not make that point explicit in terms of the significance of memory of God for the positioning of the person in the ongoing chains of lives, or alternatively of redemption from those ongoing chains of lives. Memory seems to be very central then around death, also in a soteriological way, in a saving way. Is this correct? Could you expound more upon this?
Yeah, in the Sikh community, soteriology, I think soteriology is always complicated. I think we try to simplify it in a lot of traditions. Certainly in the Sikh tradition, you have Guru Nanak talking about the court. And if you've done actions in this life that are worthy of being in God's presence, God is the ultimate king, the sovereign, you'll find a place in God's court. But ethics are what are important there. So you cannot remember God at the end of your life and be saved if you've lived a crappy life the rest of it. So instead of remembering God at the time of death, I think Sikhs are called to remember death at all times in life, which is a death then becomes the horizon during which an ethical life is possible. Knowing that the soul will be judged and the wicked will be thrashed, as Guru Nanak says, that the soul's journey, this lonely journey that the soul takes after death, we are in some sense spending our entire lives preparing for it. So the moment of death ends up becoming a moment just like any other, and there isn't a separation then between when you remember God and when you don't remember God.
It's very powerful.
In other words, part of Sikhism's revolution or change in relation to Hinduism also touches on the evaluation of memory in its place at the moment of death, like that?
Oh, I would certainly say so, yeah. That there isn't one moment of death. Death and rebirth are always happening, moment to moment in our lives.
Okay, but Hindus might agree to that, but you're saying that there is a downplaying of the significance of memory as part of transition to the coming world in relation to to what I described, as I think is a very strong Hindu emphasis. Okay, thank you.
It will be very interesting to
Yeah,
compare.
let him finish, Peter. Yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely, absolutely.
Guru Nanak has a specific hymn in which he's talking about ancestor worship, remembering ancestors after death, and asking, are those rice cakes that you're leaving really going to go to your ancestors? And if you're a thief, right, and you buy those rice cakes that you're giving to the ancestor worship, man, you're really sending some bad stuff up into the other world, right? Your ancestors are going to get their butts whooped. I mean, he literally talks about the ancestors being thrashed. So he almost uses these sort of practices that are there. They're not just Hindu practices. They're all over the Punjab in different ways, to remind people that there's a much different set of equations that are important in human life, and those are ethical questions that need to be answered rather than ritual questions.
Beautiful. Okay, we're going to come back to ritual.
Can I say one more question in relation to what we had before? Sorry to interrupt you, Peter.
No, it's okay.
In the overall, Peter touched on this, in the overall economy of remembering God, remembering metaphysics, so to speak, and remembering history. Is there some way you can assess for us how that economy breaks down, 90-10, 50-50, everyone plays it, how they feel comfortable, flexibility, fixity? How do these different types of memory work out within the overall economy?
I think it really, there isn't an ideal there. I think there are a lot of Sikhs who are sort of more, we would call them, more spiritualized, who are remembering in a kind of non-historical way. And there are Sikhs who have a more political edge to their religiosity, for whom the political memory is more vital. And so I would flip your question and say the way that the Sikh remembers kind of sets up what kind of Sikh they are and what their practice is like.
Interesting.
Yeah, it certainly is. And it actually takes us back or on to another point. I want to slightly change the direction and ask about forgetting. Because I think you've touched on this. Is everything in our narrative, that historical part, to be remembered? Are there things, is memory of the historical, of the narrative part, is that to be selective, or should we remember everything? How would you see that?
I mean, I don't like, so maybe this is me answering from a more sort of historical scholarly perspective rather than with my, Sikh hat on, which would be a turban. But I think religions don't set out to remember in a way that we ought to do this or ought not to do this. I think they just do. And I think the fact that so much emphasis is given to this historical memory of selected events, right? So remembered in a way that from a critical historical perspective, you could say, well, that really wasn't a massacre. That was more of, you know what I mean? We're not remembering history. We're remembering memory.
Beautiful.
And so I think religions just set up these events as to what it is that they're going to remember. The question of forgetting, though, is a really, really great question. There's a fear of forgetting. There's a fear of forgetting certain events. There's a fear of forgetting language, right? And so you have in Khalsa schools, in Sikh schools, you're always going to have a language class. I mean, I've never not seen one, right? Because for Sikhs, you always want to be able to interpret the guru, the word, in that way. So those are things that you don't want to forget, right? Do you remember everything? No, we're not supercomputers, right? We're not hard disks. But what is remembered in ritual settings, in settings that are repeated over and over again, sets up, again, the kind of religiosity that we're looking for. And for many Sikhs, it's hard to separate out the spiritual from the political, which goes back to how they remember Guru Nanak's mission, in which those two things are not teased out as well.
So now it does take us back to those difficult memories that might have repercussions as to the way you see the world today. I wonder if you could just flesh out a bit more what the difficult memories are for Sikhs and how you might deal with them, or how do you deal with them?
Well, I mean, I think the most traumatic event, the first and most traumatic event in Sikh history would have been the martyrdom of the fifth Guru. But that's transformed from an assassination to a martyrdom, right, through the process of memorializing it. And so what Sikhs do in that is that they, around Punjab, they set up these things called Shabils. It's June in Punjab. It's hot, right? 120 degrees hot. The air hurts. And Sikhs are remembering the heat that their guru would have experienced sitting, being tortured with heat on a hot stove by handing out cool drinks to road travelers of all kinds, of all different religions or no religion, whatever. So the process of difficult memory is transformed through service, through sweetness, through those kinds of things. Now, there are more recent memories that are very, very difficult. And for the last decade or so, we've been at the crux of remembering or forgetting the year 1984, in which Sikhs in Punjab saw the invasion of their holiest Gurdwara, the Darbar Sahib in Amritsar, and anti-Sikh, some would say pogroms, some would say massacres, some would say genocide, in urban areas in India after the assassination of the Prime Minister by her two Sikh bodyguards. Right now, there is a Scottish man in India who is under arrest. He's a Scottish Sikh with no charge sheet. His name, if you look at the tagline, hashtag Free Juggi, Jaggi, his name is Jagtar Singh Johal. He is under arrest by the Punjab police on certain charges that people are saying are dreamt up. Why do I bring this up? That man has a website called remember1984.com. And so his memorialization of that event, his never forget, definitely has political consequences in the Sikh relationship with the secular state. So that is an example of a young person. He's, I think, even younger. He's about in his 30s, who has been brought up on this never forget 1984, and from whatever perspective is either paying the consequences or getting his just desserts or whatever you want to, however you want to look at it, in jail right now. And there's people all over the world tweeting and calling and raising voices up on his behalf. This only sort of propels remembering 1984 even more. Interestingly, though, I was talking to Sikh college students in Berkeley a few years ago. I was preparing a class on Sikhism at UC Berkeley, and I was asking them, hey, what are you guys interested in learning more about? One of the things that these kids said to me was anything but 1984, which is to say that this memory had been so inculcated in their growing up, people were so afraid of them forgetting it, that they felt that that was out of whack with what they wanted to learn more about, which is Sikh spirituality, Sikh music, other aspects of Sikh history. But then I teach in a summer camp, like I said, in New York State, and on one of the feedback forums, a few people said, why are we learning about all this Guru stuff? When are we going to learn about 1984? So that event is itself, right, that year, that series of events is itself contentious within the community about, okay, can we put that memory aside and look at other memories? Should we forget it? Should we never forget it?
Can I ask something, because I'm thinking of the Jewish context as a basis for comparison. And in the Jewish context, we have a fundamental memory, which is the memory of the Exodus. I would suspect that is the most important thing to memorize to memorialize. It's memorialized in scripture and ritual. There is memory of Sinai. There's foundational events that are part of memories. And then let's say we have, in terms of recent events, we have the Holocaust, which is the great trauma. For some communities, especially maybe the less observant, the memory of the Holocaust has a great commanding presence and it shapes identity. But if you think from the perspective of pure religion, the hierarchy is very clear where the foundational events take precedence, they shape identity, and then later events fall in within that larger pattern. Listening to you, I'm struck by two things. The first is the lack of some foundational moment, or maybe it's a foundational person instead of a moment. That's why it is. And the second is that there isn't really, as a consequence of the lack of a clear focus of what should be remembered most, there's also, in educational terms, not a set program that determines what is the most important thing to remember, and hence these discussions. How much am I hearing you correctly?
Maybe you're hearing me correctly, but Jews also have a 2,500-year jump start on it. So the fact
not to mention that we're the chosen people, yeah.
Yeah, you have a lot of great advantages.
Yeah. That was a joke for all the viewers.
And falafel, you know.
Falafel.
I would disagree that there isn't a foundational memory. I think there are memories that are up for contestation. And
how do you mean that? I didn't understand.
Well, so the question is, do you remember Guru Arjan's martyrdom in light of 1984? Or do you remember 1984 in light of Guru Arjan's martyrdom in 1606? Right? Like, they're only what, I'm a religion PhD, not a math PhD, but I think they're only about 380 years apart, right? And for the most recent one, we're only 30 something years away from it. So just the quantitative issue is just so different. I mean, you have archaeological evidence, you have textual evidence, you have material evidence of that memory versus only having the evidence of the book of Exodus, right, for the other memory. And then you kind of go back and do the archaeology based on that. I mean, there's just the sets of questions and the ways that you approach history and the ways that communities fight it out over time is different. I mean, but
the fact is that when you had to now name what you would have considered a foundational memory, was Guru Arjan's martyrdom. Is that the foundational memory of Sikhism, or maybe it's wrong to pose that question?
It is a foundational memory in Sikhism, because a lot of stuff.
Isn't the coming of Guru Nanak more foundational?
Okay,
this is a really interesting question.
Yeah, I could spell that out for us, because I think this is really fundamental. What really is the foundational? What is the foundational memory? Thanks, Peter, for solving technology. Yeah.
Yes, I don't know if you saw that.
I saw the message. Yeah. Thanks for taking care of it. Yeah. What is the foundational? Tell us more about what are foundational memories, because that'll give us a good handle. This question, I think, can take us towards a good handle, because here we are, martyrdom. That says a lot. That takes towards history, suffering, social justice. That has a very strong focus on all these. And then I just suggested a whole other direction, which is Guru Nanak's coming, and you may approve that or suggest other things. What are the foundational memories?
I think, to go back to an earlier point, the memories that the Sikh chooses to make foundational tells us a lot about what kind of Sikh that person is. Right? So, for example, Bernie Sanders is Jewish, wasn't talking about the Exodus on the presidential stage, right? His memory was of much recent issues, and he was speaking to an American audience about a larger issue. Right?
But he may be Jewish, but he wasn't speaking as a Jew. That's not the same.
But that's exactly my point. Why not, right? So my other point is that what kind of Sikhs are we talking about? Which Sikhs are we talking about? You're going to select certain memories, and that is going to dictate kind of what experience of Sikhism you're having.
Okay, if I talk about turban-wearing, religiously oriented Sikhs, does that narrow it in a way that's helpful?
No, but I can tell you that I'm a turban-wearing, religiously oriented Sikh, and for me, absolutely, Guru Nanak's memory is more foundational, right? There are gurdwaras up and down the coast of Los Angeles that are not going to have that are going to have a sort of militant leader on their walls, right, from the 1980s as memorialized, rather than the hymns of Guru Nanak.
Really?
Yes. And so that is a different kind of experience of being Sikh. You can go to a Gurdwara 10 miles up the 101 in the same Bay Area and have a much more pacifist kind of experience. But I think the real reason is that this is a religion that has grown up in a few centuries in the light of history. And so another way to frame the issue, Alon, is let's wait and see what Sikhs memorialize, right? Let's see what is non-contested over the course of the years. Or anthropologically, let's go in and see what memories are being brought to the front rather than not, right? That actually provides a lot more interesting kinds of food for thought than sweeping kinds of statements.
So I'll tell you what I've just learned from you, which memory serves as a great prison for. That really the issue of memory is a prison for the quest for a Sikh identity that is under discussion and information.
Replace Sikh with any other religion, and I would say that it might not be so different.
In fact,
Awesome.
I was
think about that. It will be a takeaway.
Yeah.
Thank you.
As you were talking, Alon, I was thinking about the fact that my cousins would have on their wall, the picture of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the memory of him and his influence is so profound. I won't say it overshadows the Exodus. That would be ridiculous to say in terms of Jewish history, but it certainly is for them a powerful memorialization and memory that is not part of my Judaism. So I can see parallels in the Jewish world as well.
Another thing I refuse to do is speak for all Sikhs, right? I just don't think that's healthy in interfaith dialogue. So I'm trying to give you a cross section of what different people are doing with some kind of theoretical magnifying glass to look at that.
So now we've raised the issue. It's been behind this conversation that's been going on now. So I wonder whether you could just flesh out a little more in terms of memories, both the positive memories that you've discussed and the negative memories that you've discussed. Would you like to reflect on memory and interfaith dialogue or interfaith relations or interreligious relations, what role memory can play?
I think I love talking about values. And I love when people come together and they do actions and engagements, physical stuff, and serve, and then talk about values, and then point to stories, which we could call memories, that sort of say, in my tradition, we have this story of the prophet, peace be upon him, riding on a horse to the heaven, right? And what that, so in interfaith work, the memories are what make us a community. The values, insular communities, right? The values that we pull from those to speak in the public sphere are the ones that bridge across communities. I can't share a memory of the Exodus with you, right? But we can discuss, even though none of us are Baptist Christians, Martin Luther King's On the Mountaintop speech as using as such a reference point, right? Exodus, and talk about what that might have meant in his lifetime, right? But you're not going to have a meaningful memory of Guru Arjan's martyrdom. I shouldn't expect you to. But we can talk about what, the value of selflessness that comes out of my tradition, and you can tell me a story about the value of selflessness that comes out of your tradition.
Can I query what you just said? Yes, that is true for the portion of memory that's historical, but then maybe the answer to Peter's question might have been that the memory of God is something that can be shared. The memory of the higher spiritual reality is what can be shared, rather than just the values that come out of historical stories.
I don't know what you do with shared memories of God. I don't know what you do. My hope for interfaith cooperation in this world is that we build a better world that I can see, touch, and my children can literally breathe in. What are we going to do with memories of God? The Sikh emphasis, again, is on ethics, is on doing. It's on building a better world. My question would be, what are you using the memories for? If you're using the memories for sitting around and talking about how great God is, great. But I want to hang out with the people who are building houses for the poor. I want to hang out with people who are cleaning the water for other people to drink.
I wouldn't contest that. I think of Sikh teachers. I'm learning. There's an interesting learning experience having this conversation about diversity within Sikhism. Within the diversity, I can think of figures such as Yogi Bhajan on the one hand, or even our own member at the Elijah Board of World Religious Leaders, Mohinder Singh, who while extremely active in a practical way, educationally and other ways, there is a deep quest for the ongoing practice and awareness of the spiritual life as something that also communicates to others and inspires them to the reality of God. I will tell you that all my friends who have made contact with Sikhs, both through Sikhs visiting the Holy Land and visiting Amritsar. Yes, langar, for the listeners, langar is the free meal that's always offered to people who come to the Gurudwara or to the temple. Yes, langar is an impressive institution, but the power of chanting, the power of faith, the spiritual life is something that communicates to others and is actually something that can be shared. So the ongoing chanting and memory of God through ritual, I have seen both in myself and in other visitors, Jewish, Christian, and of different faiths, has a huge communicating power across tradition and something shared. So I would have said, based on my experience with
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'm remembering that I got to pick my kids up from school. And do you have any questions for me?
So I wondered that then whether you could just give us a final thought about memory and ritual. You've mentioned it in terms of the recitation, you've mentioned it in terms of the prayer, but if you could just perhaps maybe share another example or just a reflection on memory, ritual, and the interplay between those two terms.
Yeah, I think Alon is right, that if you go to a lot of Sikh spaces, you're going to see people singing or meditating or doing a bunch of things. When I look at my faith, and I can only speak for myself, I believe in an activist faith. And I believe Guru Nanak not as somebody who came to close his eyes and sit in the mountains, but actually very critical of people like that. And so my quest in my faith is to engage with people across lines of difference who are out there doing the work, and hopefully being a good enough model to want to have other Sikhs want to do the same. There are a lot of models of Sikhs, including Nishkam Seva folks, including Khalsa Aid folks, who translate the memory of the ritual into the memory of community engagement. That is the hallmark of Sikhism.
So you do the ritual in order to remember the values or the ethics or the principles of activism?
There just like there isn't a wall between religion and politics, there isn't a wall between God inside of us and the need of the world outside of us.
It's been a wonderful interview. I wish we could spend more time, but I know that as a parent, children take priority. So, Alon, you're happy that we will say good night, and it really is good night. Yeah, and look forward to seeing.
Thank you for taking the time, Rahuldeep. We were very enjoying this conversation.
God bless you and your work.
Thank you so much.
God bless us, including yourself, in our work, because we are all working together.
Inshallah, as the Muslims say.
Thank you.
Thank you.